Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Last presentation for 2020. It's been quite a year. Also, thank you for joining, listening to a bit of work that I've been working on for quite a while as part of my PhD. Without further ado, let's go. Just set everything up, if it ever works. All right. In terms of introduction, we know that mechanized harvesting is increasing worldwide. These mechanized systems are highly productive but capital demanding. The investment decision requires that there's enough timber of a specific size to remain productive, and that there's enough support to enable effective use of these machines throughout their productive lifetime. The questions posed are, though, does the capacity or the size of these machines affect overall productivity? How does the tree variability affect the machine productivity? And what is the financial penalty incurred when applying these specific machines to a site or an APO? The objective of the study was obviously, based on these, was to investigate how well we can distinguish between the optimal tree size ranges for two different harvester size classes in terms of machine productivity and cost. Methods: we collected long-term harvester data from two machine models, a small or a relatively small Ponzi beaver and a larger Ponzi bear. There were 4 machines in total. These data were filtered only to include clear felling data on Pinus spatula. They were obviously all working on, there were some working in thinnings, there were some working in clear fell, and they were also working in multiple different pine species in the area. The productivity for these machines is modeled using a nonlinear approach. We use the well-established relationship between machine productivity and tree size, in other words, a DBH, and then separated the effects on this by the machine or the machine capacity, so how the machine reacted to the different range of trees and tree sizes. From these results, we did some machine costing to develop an understanding of productive machine cost per productive hour, and then did cost sensitivity analysis. To put things into perspective, 2 images I grabbed from the Ponzi website. On the left-hand side, the Ponzi beaver, and the right-hand side, the Ponzi bear. Relatively size difference: a 6-wheel drive Ponzi beaver, about with a 150 kilowatt engine size, and an 8-wheel drive Ponzi bear with a 240 kilowatt engine size. The defining factor are the harvesting heads, an H6 head and H8 head. The H6 being just over 1,000 kilograms and H8 are 1,250. But then the maximum opening size are 600 millimeters for the H6 and 740 millimeters for the H8. This is by no means the size of trees they can use, just means that there's a relatively larger capacity and they can handle bigger tree sizes. The data set contained roughly 1,900, sound like someone more in the public speaking here, 196,000 records. In other words, 196,000 records of each individual tree. It was 18 months of data. Had each tree in detail, DBH, height, volume, logs produced from that, the volume of the logs, and also some level of understanding of the tree taper, because it measured every single diameter of the tree as it progressed across the stem, merchandising every 10 centimeters. So the volume for every tree, every 10 centimeters of stem. It had the time to harvest in terms of a date stamp, as well as the GPS position of the machine while it was harvesting the tree. Also, other operational details: what the machine was, what the machine's name was that harvested, the operator who harvested, the site, and other details. Looking at the 2 graphs, we have the data before cleaning in terms of histograms. The y-axis is the counter trees, and the DBH on the x-axis. You can see that the bear harvested a lot more trees than the beaver, and also the size range was greater in the bear. The bear did harvest bigger trees than the beaver. The bear is designed to harvest bigger trees, in other words. Cleaning of the data was necessary. We had to remove some records, odd-sized trees, trees at the point of delay. The onboard computer sets a delay of 5 minutes, where the operator is then prompted to give a reason why they're not producing trees or not harvesting. Also, when one isn't able to remove data points visually, I applied this distal cleaning technique to get rid of the real odd outliers. The two plots below here, the bear and the beaver, are scatter plots after we clean the data, or I clean the data. You can see productivity on the y-axis and then the dBH on the x-axis, how as the tree size progresses, the variability increases. This phenomenon isn't unique for this data set. It does appear in other data sets too, how the variability increases the bigger trees get. The thing is here, how do you model these data? Where does the productivity line lie? Especially when you're looking at a pool of both machines lying in the same data set plot. The productivity model, in order to visualize what is happening in these particular clouds of trees, I divided the data into classes and plotted these data against productivity against dBH. The classes, I divided the range into 2.5 centimeter classes, and then applied a box plot to each of these classes. You can see how the median for each box plot follows a particular pattern, so it increases, plateaus, and drops off, and then maybe to a lesser extent in the beaver, but still there's a drop in productivity in the greater or the larger tree sizes. It's quite important to note that on the levels of productivity, you can have the bear runs from about 10 cubes an hour right up to about 190 in terms of the bigger range at the top here, and the beaver from some of the lower ends to about 150, where the sort of the medians are sort of mid-range between those ranges. The productivity model, a big term here. I applied a combined exponential power and power function. It is a nonlinear function. It's basically characterized by a rapid increase in productivity, tapering off, plateauing, and then dropping, similar to what we saw on the previous slide, looking at those box plots. You can also see that the already established relationship of productivity versus tree size is well evident there. Looking at the graph, machine productivity over dBH, the two curves here, the dotted line is the bear, much more productive and effective, especially looking at the bigger tree sizes, and then the dashed line, the beaver. Some stats that we got from this model was using integration to understand the mean productivity, sitting at about 63 for the bear and about 44 for the beaver. Yeah, not nearly near the peak. Using the first differential to establish where the maximum productivity was, 91 for the bear and about 63 for the beaver. And these two maxima lie roughly at about 42.5, if my line's right, for the bear, and about 39 or 40, roughly in the middle there, for the beaver. Machine costing was done using a model that was developed in 2014 by a few local and international experts. The cost action or cost model for calculation of forest operations. It's a nice, simple single machine model based on Excel with very easy to follow inputs and outputs. Looking at the inputs, I just did a screen grab from the bear instead of doing both the bear and the beaver. It divides the machine costing into fixed costs and then variable costs. Fixed costs include the purchase price of the machine and the attachment here being the head. Salvage values, how much we eventually want to salvage from these machines, 10% for the base machine, nothing for the head. Economic life, 15,000 hours for the base machine, 8,000 hours for the head, and then system interest rate of about 7.5%, and then other little factors like insurance and transfers of the machine. Variable costs, fuel cost per liter, basically today's prices, a consumption of 20 liters per hour, and then an oil and lube factor of about 20%. Maintenance repair, a bit of a industry standard or costing standard using 100%. So 100% of the machine cost would be used to repair it maintain and repair it over the lifetime of the machine. Looking at running gear, 8-wheeled machine, 50,000 Rand, roughly for a tire, that would roughly last like 9,000 hours. And the consumables being the bar, the chain, and the sprocket, with their respective costs and lives. The model allows for operator costs because there wasn't a particular standard or using values that may be disputable. We left operating costs out of it, operator cost, and looked at pure machine cost for this model. In terms of other inputs, our productivity and operations inputs worked on about 248 working days a year, 2 shifts a day, about 8 hours scheduled. That's excluding all breaks a day. Tree size of 0.95, producing about 67 trees an hour, equating to the mean productivity of about 63 cubes an hour, and an expected machine utilization of about 85%. Pre-operations also displayed in the model give you an idea of the scheduled hours per annum, the productive hours taking into account your utilization, the estimated annual production that machine could possibly produce, economic life of the machine and the attachment, salvage values, and then also the tires, how long each tire would last in years. In outputs are displayed in fixed costs with annual costs, monthly costs, productive machine hour costs, cubic meter costs, and the percentage of the total cost. In terms of depreciation for each of the attachment of the machine, annual average investment, interest total, insurance, garaging, machine costs. Gives you the totals, and below there, because it's a big table, I split the variable costs off. It gives you an idea of the fuel and oils, the maintenance, repair, tires, and consumables, also in similar annual, monthly, production machine hour or cubic meter. For the costing, these are the outputs that I got for those 2 machines, looking at 2,000 hours, 2,000 Rand, 2,080 Rand an hour for Bear, and 1,650 Rand an hour for the Beaver. Cubic meter cost 32 Rand for the Bear and about 36 for the Beaver. Basically, just looking at there's big differences in productivities that equate to these particular cubic meter costs. So, in terms of cost analysis, what happens when you compare the machine cost across a range of tree sizes? We've always really worked on traditional mean tree size for a compartment. We only really had access to enumeration data, which does generate tree distributions and an idea of how much the tree numbers and where they are in the compartment. But now we have access to all the trees historically, basically based on the machine data that we have. This can be for a compartment, it can be for an APO, it can be for any level of detail, as well as pre-harvest in terms of LiDAR and photogrammetry. These are new technologies that we're using to actually map and predict what we have available in terms of tree stock on our sites. Some cost analysis, looking at this graph, harvesting cost and tree size excludes the US dollar price there. This is a graph I'm putting into a publication, so converting it back to rands and then back to US dollars would have been a challenge. Well, it would have just taken a little bit too much longer than I had. And on the other y-axis, we have machine productivity. We have the graphs that you've seen already, the 2 machines, the purple being the Bear and the Beaver, as well as 3 additional curves. We have the brown one and the green one. These are the cost curves, the brown being the Bear cost and the green being the Beaver. You can see how the Bear is more expensive in smaller trees. There's an inflection point around about here where the Beaver becomes more expensive. So how the effect of the tree size on the cost is. Comparing these two and looking at the cost difference, the red line, you can see that the Bear, what we've just seen, the Beaver is cheaper to run until a particular point, about 26.5 dBH. From there on, the Beaver becomes more expensive to run. Yeah, so there you have it. There's also a range where one can take from about 25 to about 28, where the net cost or the net cost difference between the 2 machines is basically 0. So there's a range where the size of the tree doesn't really make a difference, and they basically operate equally. Looking at cost sensitivity, large capital investments, there's obviously a concern in how factors influence the cost of capital. In addition to the cost analysis of a tree size, we did a sensitivity analysis. So we tested the robustness of cost under each of the machine's productivities to varying interest rates and shift lengths, and developed a very interesting graph. Now, if you cast your mind back to the costing, you can see our baseline, or the relative cost on the relative cost on the Y, and then scheduled hours on the X, as you can call it, the Z, the interest rate sitting here. Our original costings were done on 2 8-hour shifts, 16 hours, and a 7.5% interest. So that basically is the point where we compare from. So we did a few scenarios worse and a few scenarios better, if we can call it that. And the relative cost, the one being all things being equal, and then and the pivoting around that scale. So if we take the possible worst case scenario at an 8-hour shift and a very high interest rate, you can see from our base, we have roughly a 25% cost increase. That means our bear is 25% more expensive to operate. In the opposite direction, you have down to the longer hours and then the lower interest rate, you have a reduction of about 10%, meaning the bear is cheaper to run in these particular situations. To conclude, I hope you haven't raced through this too long. Machine drive data. The study relied on remotely gathered calibrated data sets. We say calibrated because if you're dealing with autumn, you need to make sure that your machine's harvesting head is measuring accurately so that you produce the right kind of log assortments for the market that you need. This obviously leads to less control. And typical time studies where we're allowed to, or we have the ability to measure, watch, understand, see what the machine is doing and we can take control of what's being measured, what's being done. However, this allowed the investigations to use many more observations and concentrate on the big trends in these data. You can see with 196, okay, even with removing some of the data according with the anomalies, we'd left with probably maybe just over 150,000 records. So it's a lot of data, and then the big trends are there. Looking at the model, there's a general relationship between productivity and tree size is still well maintained. But what's quite nice there is you're able to, with these big data sets, you're able to view the technical limitations of the machines, in particular in the small and the larger scale of the trees that were harvested. Cost calculations. When looking at the inputs that we put there, the life and depreciation may have been lower than those used abroad. We used 15,000 hours as well as in terms of life, and then the European standards are pretty 18 to 20. Also, we assume that both machines have equal productive life. That's obviously if they're working in ideal situations. The machine cost difference, we can see the widely established relationship of the high cost in small trees stabilizing at an optimum and obviously increasing as the trees reach the technical limits. Also, the cutoff for the effectiveness of the machines, that was about 26 centimeters dBH, so quite relatively small for the size of the trees that were harvested in the area for small clear fell. But there's also, we know that there's a trend towards shorter rotations and maybe bigger machines will become less popular. But you speak to suppliers and contractors, the bigger machine often is able to handle anything. So it might be more expensive, but is highly productive and can deal with most things. Looking at cost sensitivity, obviously the capital outlay does drive investment in machines. We need to run these machines as many hours as possible to increase, which obviously increases maintenance and repair. So does drive the issue of understanding the quality of the repair and making sure the quality and the standards are maintained so that you can run these machines as long as possible. Influence of high interest rates and shorter hours is mainly due to the high production rates. That can be somewhat offset because these machines are highly productive in the area. Also, in general, there are clear differences between the two machines' productivity maxima. You can see that from the graph. Clear felling in flat terrain, these large saw timber trees that are well pruned, it's like in manicured areas, does mean that the figures that are produced in this paper obviously are potentially at the frontier of cut-to-length harvesting, but it is the most ideal place to do harvesting. Nice, well-managed plantations of big trees. Great, and I think that brings us to the end. Thank you very much to York, Safi and Monty for the very generous support to the work that we do and I do. It's been fantastic. Thank you to you all for coming to listen and taking time out during your lunchtime to see what we're doing, and to Bruce and Rasmus for their help and input into the work that we presented here today. Thank you.